You're listening to ABC Radio, and help me, I'm a comedian. I'm Ashwin Segar, hosting the show with a comedian guest who is going to talk to us about relationships not working out. It's quite a theme these days, isn't it? Divorce, separation. The grass is always greener, even when the relationship is going well. So we thought we'd talk to Vanessa Larry Mitchell about that topic. And you're also joined by our regular psychologist, Dr. Rachel Hannam, as well. Hi, Vanessa.
Hey, Ashwin. Thanks for having me on.
Can you start by telling us the story of some of these failed relationships so we can get a bit more of an understanding of what happened to you and how that might relate to other people?
I found a partner that I didn't get married to, but I had a child when I was 21. And so he was probably the classic, this is what my parents would want for me in terms of that, that person. That didn't last very long, which is no surprises now looking back.
Before you say it didn't last very long, what were the classic features that this person had?
All of the external qualities, I think. So, stable job, skillful, manly kind of skills, mechanic-y stuff, around the house kind of stuff. Those things that we probably saw Dad doing a lot when we were growing up. And, a good person to know, that.
But it didn't work out. Even despite those qualities, it didn't work out. Can you tell us a little bit about what the reasons might have been?
I think I very quickly slipped into the mum role and the housewife role, and anyone who knows me now will know that that is not a role that I need to be in. But I think, I was 21. I had no idea who I was. I was still figuring out my own value set. And so, yeah, that was never going to work, gave it a crack. And then after that, I was single for a few years, and then I met the guy that I married, who I still have a lot of respect for him. We were big time in love, probably a level of love that's not sustainable, but so fun and so much, electricity, all of that sort of stuff.
How long did you sustain it for?
7 years. Yeah, so we were married for, I think it was 7, maybe 8 years. We were married for 5 years, but the last couple, we both wanted out.
But that feeling of infatuation.
Oh, it's lovely.
How long did that feeling last?
A few years. We were partying pretty hard though, and that, when you party and then you're even more in love. We had a bit of that going on.
Because it adds a bit of giddiness, the ecstasy love.
The ecstasy love. Yeah, how can you not be in love on ecstasy? But we were both in a period of being real extroverts. So I think our energy was a lot for each other, which was really fun to begin with. But then when we had our son, that just changes things, and we weren't ready for what having a child and having responsibility was going to do to the two of us and what we kind of needed out of life. And I think, I know that I still haven't figured out my shit, but I know that I definitely hadn't figured out what I really wanted when I was in that marriage. Yeah.
Rachel, can I just bring you in at this point when it comes to selecting a partner to spend your life with? I feel like Vanessa's described two opposites. Mr. Practical at the start, salt of the earth, ticks all the boxes, and Mr. Exciting Party Animal.
Giving them all a go.
Giving them all a go.
I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet.
Is there any relationship advice or psychological literature on those two types of characters and where that can lead us when we hook up with those two kinds of people?
Yeah. There's so much literature and research on relationships these days that I'm trying to keep up with it every day. But what you described with the first one at 21 years of age sounds like a bit of a box-ticking exercise. It was all those sort of superficial things that you mentioned, and the formula that you think you need to follow to be happy in life. And then when it's just you and him in a room, left to kind of try to get to know each other and resonate and relate at a deeper level.
It's vanilla.
Vanilla, right. You just don't resonate. You don't have enough in common. And then with the second person that you spoke about, obviously there was more resonance. You related to each other more, and you were more in love when you had the drugs and alcohol going on. Makes total sense, as Ashwin said. But it was a heightened state of euphoria that couldn't be sustained, is what I heard you say. And I'm wondering, when you were alone in a room with your child, no drugs and alcohol in your system, what was that? Did you lose that resonance? Was there just too much conflict? What happened?
No, it wasn't conflict. I remember when we split up, kind of being surprised. So he left me. I knew it wasn't going well anyway, but I still didn't want it to end. Or I didn't want to admit that I wanted it to end, but I think I actually did want it to end.
So looking back, did you conclude that you weren't very compatible, or that you were kind of bad for each other in some way, or something else?
Looking back, I feel like the world was doing me a favour in that there's a whole better story for me. And obviously doing comedy is part of that. I would have never started doing comedy if he hadn't have left me. So I remember on what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary, I sent him a message just to say, I'm really glad we got married, and I'm also really glad that you left me. Because I don't regret being in that marriage, but I feel like it was a little bit of a pathway to the next bit, which I guess life is like, isn't it? I mean, I would have never moved to the Northern Rivers area if it wasn't for him. I wouldn't have my son if it wasn't for him. So it's just kind of like, for me, it felt like a little bit of a rolling over to the next chapter that I probably needed, because I wouldn't have done it without that step, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go back to your question, Ashwin, of how do you select a partner for life? I think these days, the pace of change is so rapid, both, externally in society and in our culture, but internally for people, much more so than in the past. I think human beings change much more rapidly than we probably used to. And so the relationships I've seen work, both public relationships and privately, that seem to work for 30 years or more, it's when both people have similar status. That's one of the things we know from the research.
Okay, so does that mean monetary status, physical appearance? What goes into status?
It's interesting that status can make a difference. So the two people may do very different things in life, but they've both achieved some degree of status or notoriety, or not. But if one has it and the other one doesn't, the research suggests it doesn't bode well always. So that's one factor. And so you need to have, if you're going to stay together for decades, you need to be kind of growing and changing together, both personally and professionally. And the odds of that are pretty low.
Do you think that's a gender thing as well? Because I think about it a lot about, I feel like men are definitely more and more intimidated by strong women, or the men that I get around. And so that's one of the things that I did realise in our relationship, looking back, was that the gender roles had changed so much that we'd almost flipped them. But then I think for a man, it's, well, what am I needed for? In terms of those, whether it's practical things or, anything outside of the emotional things, there's, we've made them redundant.
Well, I mean, unless two people are really good friends and can continue to inspire one another to keep growing and learning and, going on adventures together if that's their personality types. A lot of it comes down to temperament. Some people are actually quite happy to just, potter around the house together and garden and, watch TV, and good. They're well suited. But you're not one of those people.
I'm not one of those people. No.
So, certain temperaments are going to be more challenged to find and stay with partners in the long term. And in terms of gender, I think that my understanding is there still is a bit of a difference. High status men are still probably more satisfied if their female partners are not quite as high status. I think the other way around, it can be trickier. But again, I think the status thing is about intellectual stimulation and challenge and adventure, and I've talked to many men who want that in their partners. And if their partner's not ambitious, and they are, that can be problematic.
Rachel, you were talking about some of the things that can keep a relationship together. One of the things you mentioned was status. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we move along?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of things, and I'm thinking of the Gottman Sound Relationship House model that I use in my couples therapy. Having a good friendship is good. That's really what keeps happy couples together. Having good skills around conflict management is really important.
What's an example of a good way to manage conflict?
If I said it succinctly, it would be to try and bypass blame, judgment, and criticism, and talk about your feelings and your needs as a way of managing conflict. But every couple ends up with complaints. It doesn't matter how infatuated you are. We've all got complaints. If you live with another human being, you're going to have complaints. And there's ways to deal with your complaints. You can state it as, this is what happens, this is how I feel about it. I'm annoyed because I need more support, or I need more acknowledgement, or whatever it is that you need. So learning a literacy of needs, and then being able to ask for what you want. And have that kind of dialogue is so different from calling your partner names, putting them down, criticising them, which I see all the time in couples. It's so easy to get really defensive and critical. And what I teach couples is how to bypass their defenses and be more vulnerable, which is hard.
Vanessa, did you notice any of those patterns in your relationships that didn't work out?
Yeah, totally. I was for a very long time a very reactive communicator. So if I felt like I'd been hurt or was being attacked in any way, I would react very quickly without thinking.
We call that defensiveness.
Yeah. After my husband and I split up, I was actually studying social science, and I did a number of units to do with communication and psychology and conflict management, and I learnt heaps. And I've had to really, like, I'm not perfect, but I've had to really untrain myself around, just how to word sentences or how to word text so that it can't be misinterpreted or so that it's assertive without being offensive, all of that sort of stuff. And I wish I learnt that 30 years ago. I wish I was learning that at school or our kids were learning that at school, because that's the stuff that'll get people through life is being better at communication.
I wish that
it's hard.
too.
Yeah.
Maybe swap that half an hour of religious studies for half an hour of psychology studies
Yes.
at school.
Yeah, conflict management should probably be a subject in school.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
What about our expectations around relationships? We expect them to be like Vanessa's relationship number 2, exciting and euphoric, but it's not going to be euphoric for 10, 20 years. What's the role of changing your idea of what your relationship be? How important is that to making it last?
I think that's such a great question. I wonder, I don't know if there's research on this, but, we're in such a instantaneous culture with Instagram and social media, and you can buy almost anything you want on the internet these days. It's amazing. I wonder if that's changed our expectations and changed our brains so that, the grass is greener. And I know humans have always been susceptible to grass is greener syndrome, but I just feel like it's worse than ever. Yeah,
because they say pornography rewires your brain. You think social media has rewired our brains, and now we're just these short attention spans, lusty things running around.
Right.
Now.
Well, the research on pornography is it's given a lot of people, particularly men, unrealistic expectations of sex. But I do wonder if the internet generally has given us unrealistic expectations, including of relationships. I don't know. It's just a theory, but yeah, I think we used to be, more content than what we are now. And practicing contentment is quite tricky and probably requires us to unplug. I'm saying this for my own, giving myself advice here, by the way.
Vanessa, how about you? Can you comment on that as well, your expectations of a relationship? Because, you said you've tried a couple and you have shorter term relationships now, but how do you view that idea of changing expectations?
I think this is part of my problem, is that I actually don't know what I want. I don't know if I want all in or not. Like, I'm a bit of all or nothing kind of person. And so that's why I'll end up having 3 or 4 month relationships where I'm like, oh, I'll just see what this is. No, thank you. Okay, bye. And it's hard being on the road a lot.
Yeah, that does make it hard.
Yeah. And so I can't have all in as a single parent as well with your kids part-time. All in isn't possible, but is a little bit enough. I don't know. But one thing I think that probably for me is really important is always maintaining my independence. So I can't imagine ever having a financial relationship again. I don't want that. I want, this is me, this is mine. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
You're welcome to share life, but not my things.
And this is such a common situation that people find themselves in nowadays. It's not 1950 anymore.
Exactly.
The formula has gone, which is wonderful in some ways and extraordinarily challenging in other ways and confusing.
Yeah, it's hard to find boundaries, isn't it, around what is the line of appropriateness here and where does it sit? Yeah.
And then you end up feeling unsure, like you said, because you've got to figure out for yourself. There's no guidebook. There's no Bible. There's no guru to tell you how you should live your life. So there's more confusion. Sort of like choose your pain. Choose the pain of following other people's rules or the pain of figuring out what's right for you.
You're listening to comedian Vanessa Larry Mitchell and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. Can you talk about the value of other alternatives to relationships? Are there other alternatives, and what should we think about them from a psychological perspective? Can anything be as fulfilling as a partner and kids?
Well, the research suggests that single women are happier than married women on average. So
yeah,
that's
I'm not
interesting.
surprised by that.
Yeah. And married men are happier than single men. So what does that tell us?
Yeah, right.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh? I mean, it's an average. It wouldn't apply to everybody, obviously. Yeah, I mean, nothing is all good or all bad. Everything has pros and cons. You know, you don't have someone there to scratch that spot on your back every day when it gets itchy, right? You have
Just
to do
build
it
something onto the wall. I can attach something
that's
for
it,
that.
That's
that
it.
can be
You've got
sorted.
the door frame. Yeah, it's fine. But, I mean, there's good things about being in a long-term relationship, and then there's drawbacks. And there's good things about being single, and you're finding out well and truly what you enjoy about it, and there's drawbacks. So, again, we're living in a time when we've been all the formulas are sort of gone for how to live a happy and meaningful life, and we're all trying to figure out what's right for us.
Vanessa, let's talk about your childhood as well. Do you see anything in the way you were raised that has manifested in your relationships and your attitudes as an adult?
Yeah, totally. I hated my parents being together. I remember blowing out birthday candles, wishing they'd break up. Mum and Dad had that classic.
That was your birthday
Oh,
wish.
just like, they shouldn't have been together. They were together for far too long. But that's just what was, we grew up on a farm. Dad was a shearer and a classic bloke. Shearing bloke. So, and Mum kind of took on that. Mum was a city girl, but moved to the country to marry Dad. And I think that her heart, like, even though she played the role of the good wife, I don't know that was ever really supposed to be her story. And so, just the communication between man and woman, and even to the kids, it wasn't I know our parents loved us, but you wouldn't feel love. It was a very, what's the word?
Asian kind of love.
Asian kind of love.
This is how Indian parents did. Not much expression and emoting of feelings. And I
Zero.
love you.
Dad didn't know.
None of
Dad
that.
had happy or angry. There was no kind of in between.
But they care for you in terms of they buy you stuff, they send you to school. It's like expressed in that way.
Yeah, and you better show your bloody gratitude.
Yeah.
But not affectionate, emotionally expressive.
No, none at all.
Demonstrative,
No.
yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the reasons. I mean, I never planned to have my daughter. It was kind of an accident. But, reflecting back, I never really avoided it either. And I think as soon as I became a mum was the first time I really understood what love was. And so I think that was supposed to happen for me to figure out how to have purpose in the world.
What role do you see that you might have played in the breakup of the relationships, even if it was a small role? Looking back, what would you say was your part in it?
So the first relationship was just two completely different paths. We didn't, even though we had a child together, we didn't stay together very long, and it was very, very quick, together. Now we're starting our divide out. There was no kind of parallel of let's do life together. It was very quick. So that was, I knew that was never going to be my, that could have never been sustained. In my marriage, I don't know what it was. It was a combination of things. As I said earlier, I felt really stuck, even though, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why I felt stuck or what it was that I even wanted to do. But there was just something there that made me feel really, there was just something not right. And I don't know that it was him. I don't know. I mean, looking back in terms of communication and all of that sort of stuff, I totally had a part to play in terms of being the reactive communicator, responding to things in a way that I wouldn't have if I had have really thought about it and had have been more open and vulnerable with my communication. But I didn't have the skills then. I wasn't able to. So, yeah.
Do you think you'll always feel stuck though? Because you're an independent person. If anyone gets too close and the relationship has too many demands on you, you're going to feel stuck.
Yeah, demands is an interesting thing. I think that's what I'm really careful of at the moment, is that I don't want to feel like I owe anyone anything, and I don't want them to feel like they owe me anything. But trying to keep a relationship at that level, I think, is really tricky because, especially if I really like them, you kind of want to pull them in, and then you end up accidentally crossing your own boundary that you set. So that's one thing that I think I need to get better at, is how do I set those boundaries, but then how do I stick to them?
You're talking about commitment, because there is a certain element of sacrifice that goes into a long-term commitment. Think about it. Anything we commit to, we have to there's opportunity cost. We have to sacrifice these things over here to commit to this thing over here. And perhaps you're in the perfect place because you're not wanting to make a full-blown commitment to a partner right now, because you might have to sacrifice things that you're not willing to sacrifice right now.
Yeah, I got shit to do.
Yeah, that's right. But I just wanted to say a bit about belief. I remembered what I wanted to say before. Your parents, like many people in their generation, had a very strong and deep belief that's what you do. You get married and you stay together and you don't divorce. And that's how it's been for many, many, many generations. And this is what I sometimes call the biology of belief. You know, it's so powerful that belief is in our physiology, such that we can repress feelings of discontent and dissatisfaction to some degree for many, many years until one day those feelings won't be suppressed anymore and they'll come to the forefront. I'm guessing that your parents did eventually separate, or they're still together?
Yeah, no, they did eventually separate, which I think was a very good thing for them. Mm-hmm. When I first left my daughter's father, I remember my dad saying to me something along the lines of, you should stay with him, he supports you financially. Yeah. And in my head, I'm like, doesn't that make you kind of a sex worker, you know, or like it makes you be owned. Yeah.
That's the belief right there. And beliefs are so powerful. I mean, people kill each other out of beliefs. Yeah. That's how powerful they are.
And it was shame. It was like, you're going to bring us shame. And now I've got 2 kids to 2 different dads. I'm single and I'm killing it. You know, things are great because I've figured out how to be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, you haven't inherited and internalized those beliefs, or not any longer.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said for inquiring into our unconscious core beliefs and challenging them to see if they're right for us or not. And eventually your parents did, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Takes a long time to shake them though, doesn't it? Like it's a lot of work to get rid of.
Very much so. And it's generational.
Yeah.
You know, their generation was much harder to do it. And in some religious cultures and other cultures, you know, it's still very hard. I don't know, what about in Indian culture?
Yeah, when you were talking about in collectivist cultures in general, there's all this family pressure. You've got more people around you trying to reinforce those beliefs, and people live slightly less for themselves, more for their community, so it makes it even harder. But it has to be done because some of these problems in those communities just get pushed down. We've talked to people on the show who've not spoken about depression openly because of the stigma in these cultures. So it has to be dealt with. But you talked about shaking off those beliefs, and Rachel, you said it's hard. Do you have a program to speed it up or make it better? Ayahuasca, CBT, what's in there? How do we shake off some of these deep beliefs?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to also, I will come to your question, but contextualise this. 40 or 50 years ago, you probably wouldn't have been able to have the career that you're having now. Right?
Absolutely.
Like it's culturally and time specific.
Yeah.
Same for me, you know, like we're in a culture now where we have opportunities and we have permission to do things that, especially as women, that we would never have been able to do once upon a time. So it's understandable that people are going for it, you know. How wonderful. Your question is about shaking off old beliefs.
How do we...
unconscious core beliefs. Yeah, well, there's various therapies for doing this. And sometimes our beliefs are can be stated very simply because they're embodied. You know, things like, I don't deserve love could be a belief, or I don't deserve support, or it's not safe to be seen, it's not safe to open up. These are very basic core beliefs that we've formed earlier in life. And so sometimes just putting words around them, finding the language. I'm thinking of the context of therapy right now, and you know, restructuring some of those beliefs through, you know, finding the opposite. It is safe to be myself. I am worthy of. I do deserve love and support. I still do some of that basic, you know, thought challenging and changing work, CBT. It works if you work it, is what I often say to my clients. Reading self-help books, you know, different things inspire different people. There's many ways. I'm a psychologist. I'm biased. That's my answer.
Okay, all right. You're listening to ABC Radio. Help Me, I'm a Comedian is a show, and you're hearing from comedian Vanessa Larry Mitchell and also psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. You mentioned earlier, Vanessa, about using sex as validation. Can you talk to us a bit more about that?
So I remember very clearly in high school being one of the girls who men would not men, teenagers. I was always kind of labelled not the kind of girl you'd go out with, which it wasn't until later in life that I realised that that should be why wouldn't you want to go out with someone like that? That's a bit more fun and a bit more. But I think I carried around.
Because you were so feisty, or what was it?
No, just because I didn't fit the mould of what the other girls were doing. Okay. So I wasn't always ladylike, or I didn't watch what I would say to people, or I would be assertive to people if I felt like I had something to say. And that didn't fit the mould of a lot of those, even the girls my age of who they were or what they were not willing to do. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? And so, I think I carried that through a lot. I did feel not good enough for a long time. And so I think I used sex for, in my late teens, early 20s, around just feeling good enough, which anyone who's had sex for validation will know that it doesn't always make you feel validated in the end. But I absolutely didn't know that that's what I was doing then, but it's only in reflection. Years later you can look back and go, oh, I think that's what I was doing. And then after my husband and I split up, I know that I was doing it again. Just trying to feel good, looking for ways to feel better and feel good enough. But for the last 7-8 years or so, I know that that's completely changed my. I probably seek connection more than I seek validation, which I think is a healthy thing to look for. And it also, I mean, I'm still pro have sex if you find someone you want to have sex with and you're doing it because you want to have a good time. I'm all for that.
But not using it as a crutch anymore.
Yeah. And I think because I do feel better about myself, I do feel good enough in a whole bunch of different ways. I feel more confident. I feel more settled, relaxed, less anxious, all of those things.
Did that happen before comedy, or has comedy helped you become that person?
Comedy's definitely helped me become that person. I think public speaking in any form, I've delivered public speaking for maybe close to 20 years in a range of different roles. And I think maybe there is something about connecting to a bunch of people in a room that makes you feel important and feel respected, and you feel like, just helps your self-worth.
Well, you're being vulnerable and you're being accepted in your vulnerability.
Yeah.
And sex is a bit like that, different, but same in that way.
Yeah.
For a moment, anyway.
Or a couple if you're lucky.
Yeah, we get 10 minutes on stage. So, Rachel, can you talk about that then? Because some people listening might be using sex or drugs for validation. Sounds like comedy is another way to get validation, but at the same time, is there a problem with seeking validation at all? One of the attitudes is find validation from within rather than seeking it from anything external, comedy or sex. Can you tell us a little bit about the dangers of seeking validation from outside?
Yeah, and I want to break down the belief or myth here that it's black and white, that you either are someone who's seeking validation from others or you're not. It's not quite like that. And terms like codependency have got a bit of a bad rap in the last couple of decades. We're all codependent. Let's face it. We all depend on each other. It's just the degree to which we are reliant upon or dependent upon other people's affirmation or validation. So you've diminished the degree to which you rely on it, but you still rely on it. We all do. It's just how devastated are you when you get the opposite, which is disapproval. If we can work on our self-love and self-esteem, then we've got protection from that. We've got some resilience in the face of disapproval or being ignored or rejected in some way. We can bounce back. When we're overly reliant on that validation from an audience, a partner, or anybody, then we're going to be devastated every time we don't get it.
In the Bible it says you have to believe in Jesus to go to heaven and get saved. That's the one path, really, the Jesus path. But in the Hindu equivalent, the Bhagavad Gita, there's 4 ways to find your true nature. One of them is karma yoga, which is action yoga. Go out and achieve things, do things, but don't focus on the results. Just focus on your effort and the results will be what they will be. The second one is jnana yoga, which is knowledge, meditation, reading books, scripture. Then there's bhakti yoga, which is devotion and getting lost in devotion. So there's bhakti, karma, and there's one more, it's just meditation, the focused, which is deep breathing, meditation. So they all suit different personality types. One's for the introvert, one's for the action character, but they're all achieving some sort of inner peace, which is what we're all seeking, I think.
I read that, one of those little books about ikigai, the Japanese, finding the flow. And I feel like that's what comedy is for me, that's the flow. That's when I feel so out of my own body and time is just not even existing. Yeah, and I think that's part of, you're contributing, but that feeling of you're in the flow. And I think people can get the flow by gardening their vegetables, and maybe that's what they get out of that in terms of longevity.
You have been listening to comedian Vanessa Larry Mitchell and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. Thank you both for coming in.
Thanks, Ashwin.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.